When I approached this topic, I approached it with three questions. What do we want to know? Does the data, don't laugh. What do we want to know? Does the data tell us what we want to know? And if yes, then what do we do with the data? Now, in Marissy's many correspondences with the various task forces, for Task Force 2, she raised this question, or actually it wasn't a question, it was a stated goal for the task force. And it was apparently, Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, to develop policy recommendations on how countries may increase diversity among students and attract underrepresented groups to graduate education. So that was the framework with which I read the Task Force 2. Okay, so in the spirit of accreditation, we begin with commendations. You're going to feel right at home, the Australians, aren't you? Okay. So we have 3 commendations, just so you know. We have 6 recommendations. Okay, commendation 1. In academia, data, hard data, is usually a very scarce commodity. Task Force 2 efforts at data collection were unusually well done and were extensive. The empirical base of data established is impressive and possibly, I'm not sure, possibly unprecedented. Second commendation. The possibilities for utilizing the data are significant and may have far-reaching implications for policy analysis and for policy recommendations that can shape the future of doctoral education by informing individual university planning and decision-making. There, the focus is on university planning and decision-making. The third commendation is, in a world in which we want to bring about change, the potential for disseminating these data to inform otherwise uninformed stakeholders is extensive, and if used appropriately, can provide the impetus for action that will result in greater inclusion of diverse societal groups in doctoral education in different nations and ultimately worldwide. So those are our commendations. With regard to recommendations, and what I mean here for folks who may have just joined us today by recommendations is just simply suggestions for thinking about how further to go forth with Task Force 2. Since this is really hypothetical, I'm just providing it through the eyes of a quality assurance organization. So the first recommendation says the following. While it is clear why the data were collected, the task force needs to provide greater clarification with regard to the objectives for analyzing the data. These objectives are implied, though not explicit. They were in part to demonstrate or highlight the apparent disparities among groups with regard to access and equity. Second recommendation. The task force should be encouraged to develop a conceptual framework for organizing the data, which will then provide a basis for identification so that we know about diversity in doctoral education in the countries for which the data were collected. And by knowing that, we would know where the gaps exist for further data collection. Third recommendation. The task force needs to address definitional issues of concepts such as ethnicity, non-domestic student, etc. And some of this was actually acknowledged by the task force and discussed during the course of our conversation earlier. Fourth, it seems that it would be helpful to clarify who is defining the problem? Who is defining the problem and toward what end? And what I mean by that is the following. If the universities are defining the problem, then the ends will be different. If the ministries of education are defining the problem, the end will be different. If academicians are defining the problem, the end will be different. And if this network, power to you, Marissa, and to Barbara and others, if this network is defining the problem, then the ends may be different. So who is actually defining the problem? Fifth, is it advantageous to focus on diversity with regard to both people and programs, or is it advantageous to separate the issues and to distinguish the challenges with regard to each variable? We've talked about programs, we've talked about people, and I'm simply raising the idea whether it is advantageous to work simultaneously on these two variables or to distinguish between them. And the last recommendation is that an initial content analysis of the structure of doctoral education in the countries discussed would provide a context for understanding the realities illuminated by the data. And I just want to repeat that one because, as you probably get to know me, I think so much about interconnectedness, and quality assurance doesn't always do that, but this is sort of Elman's bias, that we do not function in isolation of the socio-political environment in which we operate. And it seems to me that that socio-political environment and the context and the climate and the culture in which we operate is so very, very key. So it seems to me that for all this excellent work that has been done, an initial content analysis of the structure of doctoral education in the individual countries discussed would provide a context then for us understanding the realities that are illuminated by the exceptional data that Task Force 2 put together. Thank you.